The next winning call could be answered by you. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to GB News Sunday. Thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime. I'm Darren Grimes, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up between now and 3 o'clock, the pressure on Rishi Sunak has been cranked up after Suffolk MP Dr Dan Poulter defected to Labour. We'll cross live to the Republic of Ireland, where anger is brewing over the government's approach to housing so-called asylum seekers. And King Charles wants to play a leading role at the Trooping the Colour birthday celebrations this year, but will doctors stop him as he continues his recovery from cancer? Now, as you well know by now, this show is absolutely nothing without you and your views. Let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we'll be discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say and join the conversation. I've got it open right in front of me right now. Or message us on our socials. We're at GB News. First of all, though, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Darren, thank you and good afternoon. These are your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says Dr Dan Poulter has not been offered a peerage to defect to the Labour Party. Speaking to GB News' Camilla Tominey this morning, Mr Streeting defended the decision. He also admitted there are challenges in the NHS, but he said those are mainly down to the Conservative Party. Conservative MP Dr Dan Poulter said he'd sit on the Labour benches until the general election, then stand down. The decision comes just days before local elections across England and Wales on the 2nd of May. The Prime Minister has again this morning refused to rule out a general election in July. Amid speculation, a disastrous set of local election results for the Tories could force his hand. Wes Streeting told GB News that Dr Poulter is not defecting to save his seat, rather he's defecting to save the NHS.
There will be millions of people, disaffected Conservative voters like Dan Poulter out there, who can see the chaos in the Conservative Party, see the failure to deliver, and are looking at the alternative. And I'd ask those people to trust the doctor, who's seen the Conservative Party up close, has seen the changed Labour Party of Keir Starmer up close, and has decided that ultimately we need a Labour government in this country to get our NHS back on its feet, to turn the economy around, and to make sure that we can look to the future with hope and optimism again.
However, Policing Minister Chris Philp defended the government's handling of the NHS, pointing to what he calls record levels of spending.
Just in the last year alone, the NHS has grown by 68,000 staff, and there are today 7,000 more doctors and 21,000 more nurses than there were a year ago. And tens of thousands of people each year are fleeing the Welsh-run the Labour-run NHS in Wales to have treatment in England. The waiting lists, the proportion of the public who are on either very long waiting lists or indeed the proportion of the public in Wales on a waiting list at all is higher, materially higher than it is in England. So on any measure, the Labour Party are doing a terrible job.
In other news, former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has called for a cap on net migration, claiming a far more restrictive system is needed. Jenrick has called for a cap of less than 100,000 a year, arguing it's the only way to restore voters' trust. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says the government's recently passed Rwanda bill will soon join the graveyard of policies that failed to tackle illegal migration, but he called legal migration a bigger scandal. According to Mr Jenrick, net migration needs to be scaled back to the tens of thousands. He resigned as Immigration Minister in December in protest at the Prime Minister's Rwanda deportation plan.
Last 30 years, politicians of all stripes have promised controlled and reduced immigration only to deliver the opposite. And the public are rightly furious at what's happened. It's placed immense strain on housing, on public services, on community cohesion, and it hasn't improved the economy. What we're proposing is that we return to the tens of thousands, but unlike previously, we have a cap. So Parliament itself votes for a democratic lock, so the public can have a degree of confidence, which they don't have today, that when politicians say these things, they mean it.
Meanwhile, more than 900 Channel migrants have crossed illegally to the UK in less than 1 week. That's according to the latest Home Office figures. The official figures show 359 migrants crossed in 8 small boats just yesterday. GB News captured this exclusive footage yesterday. 51 of those migrants had to be rescued after their small boat ran aground on a sandbank off the Kent coast. The Alba Party MSP, whose vote could be crucial to Scotland's First Minister, says it's time to build relationships. But she says the price of her support will be higher, as Humza Yousaf dithers, she says. Ash Regan hasn't confirmed how she'll vote in the motions of no confidence at Holyrood next week. Writing in the Sunday Mail, she said she'll only use her vote in the way that'll be best for Scotland. Meanwhile, Yousaf is asking leaders of rival parties to find common ground with the SNP as his leadership hangs in the balance. It comes after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens. And the Duke of Sussex is returning to the UK in just over a week's time to attend a ceremony marking the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games. It'll be the first time Prince Harry's back in the UK since his visit to see the King after his cancer diagnosis in February, and it's the first major event he's attended in the country for some time. He'll be at the service of Thanksgiving at London's St Paul's Cathedral on the 8th of May, where he's expected to provide a reading at the event marking a decade since the inaugural Invictus Games in 2014. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's over to Darren.
Cheers very much, Tatiana. Let's get stuck into today's topic, shall we? We start with the fallout from another setback for Rishi Sunak. An MP, Dr Dan Poulter, has defected from the Conservatives to Labour. He claims that the party no longer prioritises the overstretched NHS. Dr Poulter says the Conservatives are failing the health service and he could no longer look his NHS colleagues in the eye as a Tory. He will take the Labour whip until the general election, but will not be running again as the MP for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich. Well, joining me now to discuss this story is GB News' very own political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, thank you very much for your company. This rhetoric, a lot of viewers are saying, well, hang on a minute, you know, the Tories are spending all of this extra cash, our taxpayer cash, on the NHS. You know, what more is actually needed? Is it actually an issue of cash or is it an issue of reform? And if it is, then this all just looks like a pretty convenient way to go to a party that's 20 points up in the polls, is it not?
Well, lots of Conservative MPs have been murmuring that perhaps Dan Poulter just knows what side his bread is buttered and wants to defect to Labour as quickly as possible to avoid going down with the ship. That said, Poulter has a huge majority in his Ipswich and Suffolk constituency, a majority of 23,000. Now, that's not a complete guarantee that he would be safe at the next election, but, you know, it's not something that would be worth defecting to Labour for on its own. As for his reasons behind the defection, I've heard Conservatives argue too that actually Labour is now probably best placed to deal with the NHS, mainly because Labour can do the sort of reforms that would be impossible for the Conservatives to do because there would be cries of privatisation. The NHS has become a really, really toxic issue for the Conservatives, whereas Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has made all sorts of pronouncements for what he would do with the NHS, which the Tories would never be able to do. So, you know, there is an argument, of course, that Dan Poulter is just being cynical here, but there is also an argument that he has his reasons for defecting. Either way, it is causing a huge headache for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. There are a number of rebels within the Conservative Party, probably about 20 hardcore rebels in the party, who would like to see the Prime Minister ousted before the next election and replaced, probably, with Penny Mordaunt. Now, they've been sort of quiet for the last few months, rumbling on the back benches, but unable to get the sort of support they would need to actually trigger a vote of no confidence. This defection of Dan Poulter has given sort of fuel to their fire. They are now actively trying to recruit more rebels and are hoping that they will be able to get a vote of no confidence in place after the local elections. Now, it's not thought that Rishi Sunak would lose that vote, but rebels think that perhaps he would be persuaded to, you know, stand aside, do the honourable thing if a vote of no confidence were to take place at all. So this is really bad news for Rishi Sunak, and the last thing that he needed at the end of what was actually quite a good week for him. He got that Rwanda legislation over the line, committed 2.5% of GDP to defence, something which lots of his backbenchers have been asking for a long time. But it always feels with the Prime Minister at the moment as though it's one step forward, two steps back.
So then, given, you know, we've got the local elections and some pretty important mayoral elections as well on May the 2nd, is next week going to be make or break, Olivia? Is this when, you know, it could be Rishi Sunak is out of office?
It's possible. I think we should caution against sort of predicting the immediate downfall of Rishi Sunak. We know that all of the predictions for the local elections are pretty disastrous for the Conservatives. So in a way, the local election results were already baked in. You could argue that MPs who wanted to get rid of Rishi Sunak may as well have done it earlier. That said, if the results are as disastrous for the Conservatives as is being predicted, it will mean very, very low morale in the party. And there are some MPs who don't much like Rishi Sunak, don't really like where he's heading, but for a long time now have felt that the last thing that the country needs is another change of leader. They've been worried that it'll make the party look a bit ridiculous. If the local election results are really catastrophic, then they might just change their minds. It might be that the straw that broke the camel's back. They might decide, mixing my metaphors here, that it is worth that final roll of the dice to try and replace Rishi Sunak with a new leader before the general election.
And Olivia, do you give any truck to this argument that actually Rishi Sunak next week, there were some rumours he's going to go to announce to the country when the general election will be as a way in which he can secure his leadership and ensure that there won't be any challenge to his authority over the parliamentary party?
It's possible, but I think that people are suggesting that there is a rumour that he could call an election next week for an election in July. Personally, I think that is unlikely. He has been putting in place all these policies painstakingly over the past few months, including the Rwanda bill, which has only just got over the line. We're not expecting flights to take off for about 2.5, 3 months. I just don't think that Rishi Sunak would decide to go to the country before the country has seen those plans come to fruition. Same thing is true with inflation. Inflation is slowly going down, something which the Prime Minister promised he would do when he was leader. And with it, we are expecting at some point interest rates to start going down too. That is predicted in the latter half of this year. I don't know why Rishi Sunak would choose to go to the country early when hopefully in 4, 5, 6 months' time, people aren't in the same mortgage hell that they're looking at the moment.
All right, Olivia Utley, thank you very much as ever for your time and analysis. Now, folks, my panel today is Aaron Bastani, who's the co-founder of Novara Media, and the political commentator Emma Wolfe. Thank you very much to both of you for joining me today. Emma, I'll start with you. Do you think, actually, that Dr Dan Poulter's defection to the Labour Party, will this have any material impact, do you think, on the public, on their perception of the Conservative Party?
He's not a leading figure in the Labour Party. Obviously, he's a former health minister. It's bad for Rishi Sunak, as Olivia's pointed out, for so many reasons. This is a crunch week. We've got the local elections coming up on Thursday. It just adds further woes to Rishi Sunak's kind of boat full of woes. So it's bad for the Conservative Party. It's bad for morale. Could morale be any lower? You know, it really couldn't be. I mean, they are falling apart. I don't think the public would have any patience, really, with the idea of yet another Tory leadership contest. So I think that's unlikely. Penny Mordaunt, OK, she hasn't ruled herself out, but does she really want to lead a losing party into a general election in a matter of months? I mean, I guess what Dan Poulter is doing, maybe it was a surprise, wasn't it, when we realised that actually he's defecting. He's crossing the floor, but he's not standing. It was kind of a bit of a letdown for people that were getting all excited about it. He maybe is positioning himself for a kind of top advisory role within the NHS.
Well, does he want a peerage, maybe?
Does he want a peerage? Exactly. So let's see. I mean, it's one of those sort of... I think it's bigger in the Westminster bubble than it's going to be with the country, because he's not well known and because it's a sort of funny move as well from the Tories back to Labour.
Aaron, do you buy this argument that actually it's only the NHS can only be fixed under a Labour Party because the Conservatives, as Olivia said, can't do certain things that Wes Streeton has proposed without looking like they're privatising the NHS? You at Novara Media would be screaming.
The raving lefties. Well, that was probably the one thing she said which I disagreed with.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I think if you look at, for instance, after 2010, you had the Grayling reforms to the NHS. Everybody I spoke to in healthcare said, what are these designed to do? They cost billions. They probably made the service worse. This wasn't about austerity or saving the taxpayer money. It was a literal waste of cash. And that's something where I've been befuddled by the Conservatives for many things over the years, and you try your best to put yourself in the other side's shoes. Yeah. But that was one of those moments where I just thought, this makes zero sense. He's one of those people that wants a political legacy. He'll do a big reorganisation. It wasn't in the best interest of the NHS. So I don't quite buy that. I think it's going to be very difficult to sort the NHS out, full stop, because of bigger problems beyond either political party. Quickly on Penny Mordaunt, she's got a majority of 15,700. She could lose her seat.
Indeed.
I mean, Portsmouth North was a Labour seat until, I think, 2005. So it's not like, it's not true blue. So that will be a consideration as well.
But the problem is anywhere true blue? That's what you've got to take into consideration. Emma,
I mean, they're basically wiped out. The Conservatives don't exist in Scotland and Wales, do they?
And the problem here is that people are saying, well, hang on, I've heard promises from the Conservative Party before, especially on issues like immigration, and they simply haven't been delivered. Rob Jenrick this morning, who's a former immigration minister, he said, actually, we need to pledge to cap in law immigration to this country.
And he specifically says, I'm fed up with this Westminster rhetoric about, immigration is a fuel. He said, if it's a fuel for economic growth, why are we in the doldrums? He said, what people are asking for and what people in the country care about is immigration and is limiting the effect of it on their local communities. We've seen the NHS, the pressure on public services, on transport, on education, on healthcare specifically, on housing. People feel that. It's not racist to say that. It's not xenophobic to say that. It's what people are talking about.
So what would you like to see that cap be, then?
Well, I think he's right. I think tens of thousands.
Yeah.
But I mean, What I want to see, I don't even think it's about numbers, Darren. I think it's about having a system, having a Home Office that works, having deportation mean deportation, because at the moment we don't see them able to deport anyone. People appeal and appeal and appeal, and if they're turned down 3 times, they get through on the 4th time. I think people want to feel that we have a fair system, that we welcome people who come here in need or that come from a war zone, but not people just coming over on boats, not people who are just coming, you know, to milk the system.
What do you make of an immigration cap? Will that save their bacon?
Well, look, I mean, we've got a birth rate in this country, I think, of about 1.5. We have massive shortfalls in certain parts of the labour market. I buy the argument that, you know what, you could have reduced immigration, it wouldn't actually hurt the economy. I buy that in some parts of the economy. But in elderly care, health care, quite clearly we're very dependent. Even if you want to invest a ton of money, for the short term, we're very dependent on bringing people over. So I think tens of thousands, plus, of course, students, even if you don't want their dependents to come over, even if you're being very, very harsh, I think a sensible, centre-right immigration policy probably is still more than tens of thousands, frankly. Just my view. And also, you're going to have to create more incentives for people to have bigger families. And that is a conversation I don't think the right is willing to have at the moment. They want to, because there will be costs. If you want lower immigration, that's fine. And you don't want to have larger families, there will be major, major costs.
Hold on, we've got hundreds of thousands of people sitting on benefits. If you start to resource things like health and social care, the healthcare sector, properly, if you start to pay people a decent wage to do these jobs, looking after our elderly, looking after kids in nurseries, looking after, you know, working in schools, working in those low-paid jobs, if you value those jobs and pay them properly for Brits and you get people into work, then you don't necessarily need to import hundreds of thousands of people.
Take nursing. I'm not suggesting we need to import hundreds of thousands of people. I'm saying there are certain shortfalls where in the medium term this would be incredibly difficult to do. We're 45,000 nurses short. You can't just say that, right, you know, Bill and Jane, who are watching the telly in South Wales, they now need to become NHS workers because A, that's going to cost a ton of money, B, who's going to pay for it, C, it's going to take several years. So...
All right. Okie doke.
We've got a lot of young people who are sitting at home staring at screens on benefits or on universal credit.
Very true. And joblessness is, of course, going up.
Massive contributor to mental health and depression and all of that as well.
It is. Right, we'll get more from you two in a short while. Thank you very much indeed. Now, folks, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, you can go to our website. It's gbnews.com. Now you're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. The Met Police are under fire after a Holocaust memorial was covered up over fears it would be vandalised by pro-Palestine protesters. We'll have the police response. All of that and more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
On to another controversial character, this time Prince Harry. He's back in the headlines after a High Court judge ruled he must pay 90% of the Home Office legal costs for the case regarding the downgrading of his security.
And it could cost him in excess of £1 million. But he says he is determined to fight on. Let's speak to our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. What do you make of this?
Well, it's a pretty hefty bill, Eamon. This all dates back, if you think, to 2020, when he stood back as a working member of the royal family. The Home Office downgraded his security, essentially, because he is no longer a working member of the royal family. Prince Harry argued that his family could not be safe in the UK. He also alleged that a paparazzi chased his car after the World Child Awards in 2021 when he came back to the UK. He sued the Home Office because his lawyers argued that he'd been singled out and treated less favourably than others in his position. In February, the High Court ruled that the decision to change his security was not unlawful or irrational, and they were entitled, the Home Office, to take the decision they did. Then yesterday, Prince Harry lost his initial bid to appeal that ruling from the High Court, and the judge ordered him to pay 90% of the Home Office's costs. But the judge agreed to a modest reduction, but that was only a 10% reduction, which is why we've got this 90% figure. But Prince Harry is going to directly appeal. So he does have the money to pursue these legal cases. He also has a couple of cases against various newspaper groups in the United Kingdom, and he sees it as his life's mission, really, to hold people to account, including the Home Office. But by doing that, he's also potentially bringing a bit of a hefty cost to us as a taxpayer, because this is the Home Office, who clearly is funded by taxpayers, and they're having to fork out this legal money. If Prince Harry wins the appeal, then us as taxpayers are out of pocket.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday, the 2nd of May,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in. And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday, the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, loads of you have been sending in your thoughts. Mark says, quite simply, anyone who vandalises memorials should be arrested and prosecuted. This subject is getting boring. I think we're all getting a bit tired of it, to be frank. And Avril reminds us that she's sick of hearing about elderly costing the NHS so much. It's not just used by the elderly. You know, the benefits costs, the personal independence payments costs, the migrants costs, all of these things are having a knock-on effect to the NHS and elsewhere. Now, Wendy says more immigration by the Labour panellist, I assume she means Aaron Bastani, to fix the shortages. Why does he not?
What I said,
no,
sadly.
Why does he not talk about water shortages and more reservoirs and things like this? Well, I imagine you do you?
I do sometimes. Look, what I would say is we had 1.3 million net immigration over 2 years. I'm not suggesting that that is what you need to run the economy. I'm just saying tens of thousands in the short term is very low.
We'll get back onto that. Right, let me know all of your thoughts on today's stories, what we've been discussing. Continue that conversation. It's gbnews.com/your say, or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. Now, the Met Police is under fire, once again, after a Holocaust memorial was covered up. A blue tarpaulin was placed over the monument in Hyde Park in central London. Now, there were fears that it would be vandalised by pro-Palestine activists. I'm joined by former Met Police detective Peter Blexley. Peter, always a pleasure, mate. Now, the Met Police have come out quite robustly and they've said, wasn't me, and they said actually it was park authorities that have covered it up instead. But Peter, my point to that would be, well, why have authorities felt they need to cover it up? And is it because actually they fear that the police won't do a single damn thing about this?
I think there's a huge element of truth in what you say there, because what we've seen since these marches began after the 7th of October is Sir Mark Rowley's Metropolitan Police basically oppress any opposition to these marches, challenge anybody who's got a differing view, rip a sign from somebody's grasp if they dare to have the temerity to point out the truth that Hamas are terrorists. And they've chosen a side. Rowley's robots have chosen a side, and that is to enable these pro-Palestine marches to go ahead without any kind of incumbents whatsoever. And also, within those marches, to allow the hate spreaders, those who want to see the genocidal end to the sovereign state of Israel, to spread their bile, spew their hate, and quite frankly, almost do as they like.
And Peter, what is the overall cost then to the taxpayer? You know, what would this actually mean in the way of police resources and time? And the police's, what should be anyway, the police's priorities?
It's in excess of £40 million if we're just going to talk about cold, hard cash. But there is, of course, a greater impact upon victims of crimes, because these marches with 1,000, sometimes 2,000 or more police officers drawn away from other neighbourhoods, other areas of the Met, and sometimes from other parts of the country, means that police resources have been taken away from tackling crime in other parts of London and further afield. So there is an impact. There will have been shortages of police officers in other parts of the great metropolis, which will have affected response times, officers getting to emergency calls, and quite probably victims being failed or put at greater danger.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, just finally on this, we had to cover up Sir Winston Churchill during the Black Lives Matter protests, and they've had to have a ring around them during the pro-Palestine protests. We've seen, well, there've been war memorials have been stood on and trampled over like they're, you know, the rubbish under someone's shoe. A lot of people look at London right now and feel that it has totally lost control, you know, whether that be the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Mayor of London, or whether that be, as you mentioned, Mark Rowley. What do people do? This frustration, this anger that people feel, right? It's just unrelenting right now.
It is, and sadly, we are all, particularly those of us who live in London and other parts of the Metropolitan Police area, which impinges into some of the home counties, we are far more in danger than we were in previous years. And the statistics like knife crime bear that out. Sadly, there is a responsibility upon us all to keep us, our homes, our loved ones, everything that we've worked so hard for, to keep it safe, because the Metropolitan Police have, by and large, abandoned the streets. So now shoplifters rule the high streets and steal with impunity. They've abandoned the communities where we live, so burglary, car crime is carried out unabated, and offenders are simply not caught in the numbers they should be. And these protests are allowed to proceed as they wish, all of which creates the consequence, which is mob rule 2024.
All right. Peter Bleksley there, thank you very much as ever for your time. I'm going to very briefly bring the panel back in, Aaron Bastani and Emma Wolfe. Aaron, I mean, do you agree with what Peter's saying there? Do you share the frustration? We've just had Duncan write in and he says criminal damage is illegal in the country, just arrest them. Why do we insist on wrapping everything up in case it's vandalised? Why do we not actually pursue the criminals who vandalise?
Well, it's a great point. This is a criminal offence, so the idea that you might need to create new laws or whatever is just, it's just pointless. You don't need to. People love to talk about creating new laws. Often that's not actually needed. Look, if somebody commits criminal damage, of course, that should be treated as a crime. The point about protesters costing the taxpayer money, I mean, the right to protest is really important. I don't like this argument generally. You could also say, look, people drinking alcohol, we have loads of public disorder on every Friday and Saturday night across the country. That's it. Let's ban alcohol because it costs the taxpayer money to police it.
Well, it also raises a hell of a lot of money for the Exchequer.
Well, you could say all these people going into central London probably gives...
I very much doubt that. Not after you consider the takeout of policing.
Well, quite. But I think if you're Tesco or you're Pret on a Saturday, you're probably doing a good trade. But my point is, this is a fundamental freedom, and I think it's important to draw a distinction between that and shoplifting. Shoplifting is bad. It doesn't help businesses. It's illegal. This is about defending a right, and the police are there obviously to maintain the law, but also to uphold people's rights. All
right, Emma, we're going to go to the news, but I'll bring you back in after when we come back. That's Aaron Bastani and Emma Wolfe still with me throughout the show. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. We've got loads more coming up. First of all, though, we're going to get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Darren, thank you. The top stories this hour. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says Dr Dan Poulter has not been offered a peerage to defect from the Tory party to Labour. Speaking to GB News' Camilla Tominey, Mr Streeting defended Dr Poulter's decision, adding it shows only Sir Keir Starmer can be trusted with the NHS. He admitted, though, that there are challenges within the health service, but he said those are mainly down to the Tories. However, Policing Minister Chris Philp told GB News record spending by the Conservatives into the NHS shows it's improving under Tory leadership. Conservative MP Dr Poulter said he'd sit on the Labour benches until the general election and then stand down. The decision comes just days before local elections across England and Wales on the 2nd of May. Former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has called for a cap on net migration, claiming a far more restrictive system is needed. Jenrick has called for a cap of less than 100,000 a year, arguing that's the only way to restore trust with voters. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says the government's recently passed Rwanda bill will soon join the graveyard of policies that failed to tackle illegal migration, but called legal migration a bigger scandal. According to Mr Jenrick, net migration needs to be scaled back to the tens of thousands. Meanwhile, more than 900 Channel migrants have crossed illegally to the UK in less than a week, according to the latest Home Office figures. Official figures show 359 migrants crossed in 8 small boats just yesterday. GB News captured this exclusive video footage yesterday. 51 migrants had to be rescued after their small boat ran aground on a sandbank off the Kent coast. And the Duke of Sussex is returning to the UK in just over a week's time to attend a ceremony marking the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games. It'll be the first time Prince Harry's back in the UK since his visit to see the King after his cancer diagnosis in February. And it's the first major event he's going to attend in the UK for some time. He'll be at the service of Thanksgiving at London St Paul's Cathedral on the 8th of May. He's expected to provide a reading at the event, marking a decade since the inaugural Invictus Games in 2014 in London. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Darren.
Thanks, Tatiana. Now, remember, you let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we've been discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Join that conversation. I'm involved as well. Or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. I'm Darren Grimes, and you're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see an east-west split weather-wise across the UK today. Generally the best of any brightness the further west you head. Low pressure is generally dominating, and it's this weather front, this occlusion here out towards the east and northeast that'll bring some more persistent rain to some areas through the day today. Notice fairly tightly packed isobars too, indicating quite a blustery breeze, and it's certainly a wet and fairly blustery picture across those eastern and northeastern areas as we head through the afternoon. Some of those outbreaks of rain could locally be on the heavy side, brighter out towards the west and eventually across some southern spots. But notice a good scattering of showers here, 1 or 2 of those on the heavy side. And quite a chilly day still for the time of year, highs of 12 towards the north, up to 13 or 14 degrees at best towards the south and southeast. As we head through the evening and during the overnight period, the most persistent rain will start to pull away towards the northeast, lingering across the northern hours into the early hours of Monday. Elsewhere, clearer for a time, but notice a good rash of showers pushing back in from the west, so turning pretty wet out across some western spots into the early hours of Monday. Under the clearest skies, we could see a local frost, temperatures down close to freezing, but mostly frost-free. And as we head through Monday, once again, an east-west split in our weather, but it's the east this time seeing the best of the conditions, the brightest skies out towards the east and across the southeast of England. And elsewhere, plenty of showers out towards the west and eventually across many northern spots too. And again, some of those showers turning quite heavy, merging to give some longer spells of rain at times too. And temperatures a bit higher than today though, up to 16 or 17 towards the southeast, near 12 to 14 across the north of the UK.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch. I thank you very much for doing so. Lots of love for Peter Blexley, an agreement with what he had to say about a loss of faith and trust, your faith and trust in British policing. And there's an argument that actually GB News and talking about NHS reform and how important that is, and how other broadcasters perhaps aren't willing to actually even touch the issue and say that it needs root and branch reform, and that isn't just by saying, well, we need to mass migration to actually come and solve those issues for us. Someone, David, has just argued we have mob rule due to weak, ineffective policing. And he says, unless it's football fans or those, I suppose, flying St George's flags, and then suddenly the policing goes a bit overboard. But we'll get more of your comments and respond to more of your messages here on all of the stories we've been discussing today. You can visit gbnews.com/your say to actually join that conversation, or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. Now, Rishi Sunak, he claims that the Rwanda plan is causing an influx of migrants into Ireland, and he says that shows that the deterrent effect of his Rwanda plan is actually working. The Deputy Irish Premier, Michael Martin, says that the UK's asylum policy is actually driving migrants in fear of being deported to Rwanda across the border from Northern Ireland into the Republic. Now, meanwhile, there have been protests in Newtown, Mount Kennedy, where 160 asylum seekers living in tents in Dublin are due to be moved to. We're going to go live to Dublin now and join our reporter, Dougie Beattie, who's got the latest. Dougie, thank you very much for your time, as ever. How serious are these protests, and how much pressure is the Irish government now under?
Well, the Irish government has put itself under huge pressure by actually sending the riot squad in, and the locals from Newtown were sprayed with pepper spray. Now, that sounds, well, it could have been anybody, but Newtown, Mount Kennedy is, I mean, the average house price there is about 300,000 euros. Some of them are as much as 5.2 million euros. So it is not what you would say is your average right-wingers. They are a very liberal community. It is a beautiful place to live. It's right in the Wicklow Mountains. And this morning I was blown away by the amount of people that stopped their cars and told us how welcome we were there. It was great that the truth was going to be told, because what has happened, and we have came to Dublin to actually film those tented villages, and we're going to go a bit further up towards the north for some of those there. But when we got there, we thought better of getting out and filming it at that stage, because these migrants have came in. I mean, how many migrants are now in Ireland? Well, there's over 1 million more in just 10 years. And that's because we have a non-contribution welfare system, and that's the same as Great Britain. So you can come over here and get lots of welfare benefits, but how many of them have came over because of the Rwanda deal that went through last week? I would very much doubt that that is really in the mix. I think that's a bit of Rishi trying to justify the Rwanda bill, and it's also Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, really trying to say, well, it's not our fault. But when you turn security forces on middle-class, liberal, very well-off people, and that changes the playing field for everyone that's there. And this has been going on for years in Dublin. The last 2 years I've been reporting on it, and that has been in and around areas such as the East Wall, Finglas, Ballymun, and they're very much working class areas. But these areas have not got the resources or infrastructure for taking so many more people. I mean, that convent or former home that has been turned into an immigration centre in Newtown is right about 3 miles out of the main village, and there is nothing but fields around it. And there is nothing for these young men to do that are going to be put into these immigration centres, and even to get out of the village, which means that they're going to be stuck in that village. And that is what's worrying the villagers there. And it looks like a bad blow for the coalition government of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, because these are people that would have formally voted for them. And this morning I was speaking to some of the residents, one of them who was in tears, because their whole way and culture of life has been turned upside down. And on top of that, there's a GAA club. The Gaelic Athletic Association is a big player in the Republic of Ireland. It's a very good organisation. It supplies lots of community events for the community, so it really becomes a community hub. That has now been blocked off by the Garda Síochána, the Irish police, in order that these immigrants may be facilitated. So there is a problem here, and it's going to play out in these European elections during the next couple of months.
Thank you very much for that, Dougie. We'll come to our panel now. That's Dougie Beattie there, in Dublin, actually, for us, our Ulsterman. Now, Emma, can I read out a couple of these comments very quickly? Judith says, why are the migrants intense in Dublin when in the UK they can expect 5-star accommodation? And Paul says, Ireland is bringing out emergency legislation tomorrow to return these migrants to the UK. How come the Irish can do that, but we in the UK cannot return migrants to France? There's a real frustration here that actually the Irish government seem to have more gumption than the British.
Yeah, although the protests there have been pretty heated. Look, I think people have very valid concerns. This isn't anti-asylum seeker if you have a valid claim. But you can't just shunt people around and dump them down in communities where they don't have adequate resources, where there isn't anything for people to do, for especially young men, for them to do. People are worried about sort of imposing mass immigration or asylum seekers arriving en masse in an area, often moving local, in an area where there isn't enough housing anyway, where maybe education and healthcare can't keep up, and just putting people down there. They're worried about cultural kind of cohesion and community relations, all of that. They're worried about crime, they're worried about safety, but also public resources, local resources. It's no wonder that urban communities in Dublin and also these rural communities, as we saw there in County Wicklow, in Mount Kennedy, it looked beautiful. But, I mean, it's no wonder people get angry and frustrated, and that then turns into conflict. It turns into protest. It turns into, the Garda kind of pepper spraying local residents.
I mean, do you think, though...
This is happening all over the UK. It's happening up north. I know someone in the Isle of Sheppey, they're closing down an old people's home to house asylum seekers. Well, no wonder people get angry.
Yeah. I mean, Aaron, do you think that anger needs to bear out in protest? Do you think, actually, people should be doing what the Irish are doing? Is that how you actually get results from a government these days?
Well, in Ireland, it's a real mix, isn't it? So you've got lots of peaceful protests, but you also do have some really serious violence and vandalism going on. A few things. I think for Ireland, it's particularly difficult because a big part of their national story is emigration. And, of course, millions of people around the world can trace their ancestry back to Ireland. So it's quite hard, I think, for the Irish political elite in particular to say, we close the borders, don't let people in, because, of course, they've been championing emigration of Irish people for more than a century. That's the first point. So I think it's uniquely a sort of psychological problem, if you will, for the Irish nation in a way that it might not be for Britain or for France. They've pitched themselves. Part of their thing about being the good guys of Europe is how open they are because they've experienced destitution, poverty, the Irish famine, etc. So it's politically quite difficult for them now. Secondly, and I find this intriguing, some of the countries where a lot of these people now in Ireland are coming from are places like Georgia, Algeria. I mean, Georgia's quite a safe place. I've not been, but I hear it's quite a beautiful place. Yes. So, look, I think there is clearly a need for people fleeing terror, war, Afghan translators who worked alongside the British Army in Afghanistan during the British-American occupation there. They clearly won't be safe there. I understand a case for them being here in the UK, but somebody from Georgia, that's not asylum, let's be honest.
Yeah, look, I mean, my view, just to bring this to a head, my view is that actually the asylum system is completely broken, and until we fix it, we need to stop it, right? And I realise that might seem quite a radical view, but I genuinely think we, as a nation, are heading down a path of madness if we continue this trajectory.
We are, and I don't think that sounds radical. I think a lot of people would agree with you, actually. I think we are so overburdened at the moment that we need to at least close the borders until we deal with what we've got.
Yeah.
And then maybe start up again with a functioning Home Office.
Indeed. Emma Wolf there, and was Aaron Bastani before Emma. Let's now go to a break. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. There's loads more coming up. In a few minutes, we'll be looking ahead to a huge day of football with the Premier League's top two, Arsenal and Manchester City, both in action this afternoon. That title's in the running. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
A man who worked for Sainsbury's for 20 years was sacked because he didn't pay for a few bags for life. Niamke Dofu put his shopping through a self-service checkout after his night shift, and CCTV showed him choosing the zero bags used option, and he was fired for gross misconduct. Well, joining me now to discuss this in our studio is the lawyer and broadcaster and great friend of the show, Andrew Eborn. Andrew, welcome to the studio. Join you, Martin. Certainly is. Now, on the one hand, yes, he was caught banged to rights on CCTV. It looked like, and the tribunal agreed, he stole the bags, but a 20-year career dashed on the rocks over 60p?
Yeah, I mean, the headlines are horrendous, aren't they? You sort of turn around on that sort of basis. So basically, there must be a valid reason for dismissing an employee, and you have to follow due process and so on and so forth. So they can look at about capability or conduct, and there has to be appropriate procedures set in place under employment law to afford that sort of protection. What they say, however, if there's gross misconduct, you can be dismissed instantly. Yeah. Now, gross misconduct includes criminal offence like theft. And the reality is, in the law, if you take property, whatever its value, with the intent of permanently depriving the person of it, then that is theft. And so what they did, they looked at the CCTV footage, and the Employment Tribunal had a look at this sort of stuff, and the guy wasn't just pressed no bags, he went backwards and forwards and so on and so forth. So he knew he was getting bags, and what they sort of turn in, I always sort of trust comes in on foot, but leaves on horseback. And so what Sainsbury's are saying in their defence is, hang on, we lost trust in the guy, even though 20 years and so on and so forth. We need to make sure we have trust in our employees.
Do you think they've thrown the book at him, thrown the bag at him, to make all of us worry about us being watched by CCTV? Is this fella a scapegoat?
Oh, I think without doubt it's a story and a warning for everybody.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday, the 2nd of May,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday, the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Let's look ahead now to a huge day in the race for the Premier League title. Arsenal lead the champions Manchester City by 1 point. Though City do have a game in hand. And in just a few minutes' time, Arsenal will face their North London rivals Tottenham before City go to Nottingham Forest. Well, joining me now is the legendary football journalist Harry Harris. Harry, mate, thank you very much for your time. Are you calling it? I'm going to ask you to be Mystic Meg. Who do you think's going to clutch it this year?
Oh, Mystic Harry, OK. Well, I do feel like it's going to be a defining afternoon of football here. It feels like a defining moment in the entire season. I think it will be. You know, I was speaking to Glenn Hoddle yesterday, and like all Spurs fans, he says he's going to be watching this game behind the sofa. It isn't for the faint-hearted if you're a Spurs supporter, because this Arsenal team are phenomenal. It's a fantastic team, well worth watching. Spurs always concede goals. They play this fantastic high-line attacking football. And Arsenal are going for their 7th consecutive clean sheet. I mean, it all points to a very simple Arsenal win. But of course, you know, you only have to look at what Everton did against Liverpool, upset the apple cart there. Can Spurs do the same? And, you know, there's a lot of revenge here, because it's 20 years ago when the Invincibles came to White Hart Lane and won their last title. So this could be Spurs' moment, certainly for their manager, Big Ange, to prove that his style is a worthy one, the right one, be quite a controversial one. This is going to be a fantastic game.
Well, Harry, speaking of that, Jamie Carragher has come out today and he said Mo Salah is daft, following his comments with Jurgen Klopp after that game that you just mentioned there and that upset that took place. I mean, do you agree with those comments? Do you think it was a show, that, you know, that argument that they had just offside there?
Well, I think Jamie Carragher should know better, really. I mean, he played the game 20-odd years. He knows how passionate emotions can be. I mean, the manager benched Salah and brought him on late in the game with 2 other subs and clearly said something to him. I don't know what he said to him, and nor does Jamie Carragher. So until we all find out what was said, it's certainly riled Salah. And, you know, daft, well, it's always unseemly when 2 high-profile people like that are warring on the touchline. But that's emotion to the game. And I mean, you're going to see a lot of that this afternoon.
Well, indeed, we will. All right, Harry, thank you very much for your time there. That's the legendary football journalist Harry Harris. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Loads more coming up on today's show. First of all, though, we're going to get a look at the weather with Margot Agner, even. I can't speak.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Over the next few days, we hold on to rather unsettled weather conditions across the UK, but we will also see a gradual rise in temperature. Low pressure's on the scene at the moment, and it's this weather front towards the northeast of the UK that's bringing some outbreaks of quite persistent rain, coupled with quite tightly packed isobars, so quite a blustery feel to the weather as well. And we do hold on to outbreaks of rain across the far northeast of Scotland heading into the overnight period. Elsewhere, there'll be some clear spells for a time, but the showers out towards the west and southwest certainly do gather into the early hours of Monday, turning quite heavy and becoming more organised by the morning on Monday itself. Could see a touch of frost in 1 or 2 very sheltered spots, but on the whole, it's a frost-free night. And then into Monday, we'll see an east-west split, much as we did on Sunday, but this time it's the east seeing the best of the weather. Out towards the east and southeast of the UK, here we'll see some sunshine at times and mostly dry weather. Whereas out towards the west, quite a few showers from the word go. They become more widespread and quite heavy at times here, also affecting other northern areas as we head into the afternoon. In the best of the sunshine, it will be warmer than on Sunday, particularly towards the southeast, highs of 16 or 17 Celsius, nearer 12 to 14 degrees towards the north, which is close to the seasonal average. As for Tuesday, well, again, it's the east that will fare best, with the best of the dry and bright weather at times. Whereas out towards the west, a good rash of showers, those showers merging to longer spells of rain at times. It does stay fairly unsettled during the week ahead, with showers at times, but notice those temperatures also rising into the high teens or low 20s.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Now, in a few minutes, I'll get the latest on Angela Rayner, and there's all the royal news to come as well. Danny's just written in. Danny says the reason Labour are best placed to make the NHS better is because the Tories have helped the weakest and worst opposition. Do you agree with that? Let me know. I'm Darren Grimes, and you're with GB News, we're Britain's news channel.
We've blown the budget by giving you the chance to win a totally terrific £20,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer spectacular. You could use that cash to splash out on a holiday, make the garden glam, buy a new car, or just save it for a rainy day. Whatever you'd spend £20,000 on, make sure you don't miss the chance to make it yours. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the people's channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and a very warm welcome back to GB News Sunday. Thank you very much for your company this lunchtime. I'm Darren Grimes, and for the next hour, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up in this next hour, the pressure on Rishi Sunak has been cranked up after Suffolk MP Dr Dan Poulter defected to the Labour Party. There's the latest on the crisis engulfing the SNP. Just how long can Humza Yousaf actually hang on to power? And King Charles wants to play a leading role at his Trooping the Colour birthday celebrations. But will doctors stop him as he continues that recovery from cancer? And as always, this show is absolutely nothing without you and your views and voice. Let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we'll be discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say. You can join that conversation there or message us on our socials. We're at GB News. First of all, folks, we're going to get the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Darren, thank you and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says Dr Dan Poulter has not been offered a peerage to defect from the Tory party to Labour. Mr Streeting has defended Dr Poulter's decision, adding it shows only Sir Keir Starmer can be trusted with the NHS, the reason as to why Dr Poulter defected. Mr Streeting admits there are challenges within the health service, but he said those are mainly down to the Tories. Conservative MP Dr Dan Poulter said he'd sit on the Labour benches until the general election and then stand down. The decision comes just days before local elections across England and Wales on the 2nd of May. The Prime Minister has again this morning refused to rule out a general election in July. Amid speculation, a disastrous set of local election results for the Tories could force his hand. While Wes Streeting says Dr Poulter isn't defecting to save his seat, rather he's defecting to save the NHS.
There will be millions of people, disaffected Conservative voters like Dan Poulter out there, who can see the chaos in the Conservative Party, see the failure to deliver, and are looking at the alternative. And I'd ask those people to trust the doctor, who's seen the Conservative Party up close, has seen the changed Labour Party of Keir Starmer up close, and has decided that ultimately we need a Labour government in this country to get our NHS back on its feet, to turn the economy around and to make sure that we can look to the future with hope and optimism again.
Policing Minister Chris Philp defended the government's handling of the NHS, pointing to record levels of spending.
Just in the last year alone, the NHS has grown by 68,000 staff, and there are today 7,000 more doctors and 21,000 more nurses than there were a year ago. And tens of thousands of people each year are fleeing the Welsh-run the Labour-run NHS in Wales to have treatment in England. The waiting lists, the proportion of the public who are on either very long waiting lists or indeed the proportion of the public in Wales on a waiting list at all is higher, materially higher than it is in England. So on any measure, the Labour Party are doing a terrible job.
In other news, former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has called for a cap on net migration, claiming a far more restrictive system is needed. Jenrick has called for a cap of less than 100,000 a year. He says it's the only way to restore voters' trust. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says the government's recently passed Rwanda bill will soon join the graveyard of policies that failed to tackle illegal migration. But he also called legal migration a bigger scandal. According to Mr Jenrick, net migration needs to be scaled back to the tens of thousands.
The last 30 years, politicians of all stripes have promised controlled and reduced immigration only to deliver the opposite. And the public are rightly furious at what's happened. It's placed immense strain on housing, on public services, on community cohesion, and it hasn't improved the economy. What we're proposing is that we return to the tens of thousands, but unlike previously, we have a cap. So Parliament itself votes for a democratic lock, so the public can have a degree of confidence, which they don't have today, that when politicians say these things, they mean it.
Meanwhile, more than 900 Channel migrants have crossed illegally to the UK in less than a week, according to the latest Home Office figures. Official figures show 359 migrants crossed in 8 small boats just yesterday. GB News captured this exclusive footage yesterday. 51 migrants had to be rescued after their small boat ran aground on a sandbank off the Kent coast. The Alba Party MSP, whose vote could be crucial to Scotland's First Minister, says it's time to build relationships. But then she also says the price of her support will be higher as Humza Yousaf dithers, she says. Ash Reagan hasn't confirmed how she'll vote in the motions of no confidence at Holyrood next week. Writing in the Sunday Mail, she said she will only use her vote in the way that'll be best for Scotland. Meanwhile, Yousaf is asking leaders of rival parties to find common ground with the SNP as his leadership hangs in the balance. It comes after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens. And royal news, the Duke of Sussex is returning to the UK in just over a week's time to attend a ceremony marking the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games. It'll be the first time Prince Harry's back in the UK since his visit to see the King after his cancer diagnosis in February. And it's the first major event he's attended in the country for some time. He'll be at the service of Thanksgiving at London's St Paul's Cathedral on the 8th of May. He's expected to provide a reading at the event, marking a decade since the inaugural event in 2014. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Darren.
Thanks as ever, Tatiana. Now we'll start, folks, with the fallout from another setback for Rishi Sunak. Tory MP Dr Dan Poulter has defected from the Conservatives to Labour, claiming the party no longer prioritises the overstretched NHS. Dr Poulter says the Conservatives are failing the health service and he could no longer look his NHS colleagues in the eye as a Tory. He'll take up the Labour whip until the general election, but he won't, crucially, will not be running again as the MP for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich. Well, joining me now to discuss this is GB News' political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, he also said, didn't he, that the Conservative Party had changed to a nationalist party. I mean, that sort of rhetoric seemed a bit out of place. A lot of our viewers are saying, did they? I missed that.
I think the defection of Dan Poulter shows just what a fractured party the Conservative Party has become. It's always been a broad church, and usually that's commented on as a good thing. It's got those on the One Nation wing of the party who tend to be further to the left, and then those of the sort of Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates wing of the party, more socially conservative, those who were worried that the Rwanda plan didn't go far enough, and those who worried that it went too far, to give a recent example. But the fact that Dan Poulter is now calling his own party a nationalist party and defecting to Labour is bad news for Rishi Sunak. He has been trying so hard to keep these two very different sides of his party together throughout the last sort of 6 months or so. And during the Rwanda debates, he was making concessions here, concessions there, just trying to get everyone over the line with him. Well, he has now failed to get everyone over the line with him. And what makes things difficult for the Prime Minister is that if Dan Poulter was planning to stand in the next election for Labour, then, you know, you could sort of dismiss this defection as Dan Poulter just knowing what side his bread's buttered on, expecting Labour to win the election and not wanting to go down with the ship. As it is, now he's said that he will not be standing in the next general election. It makes it look as though this defection is perhaps more principled. That said, he has been an uneasy fit in the Conservative Party for quite a long time now. His own Conservative association in Ipswich and Suffolk have roundly criticised him, and there are plenty of Conservative MPs who say that they've barely seen him in Parliament, they don't really know who he is, that sort of language. So Dan Poulter himself may not be a huge loss to the Conservative Parliamentary Party, but the wider ramifications of this can't really be underestimated. There are already a group of rebels plotting to oust Rishi Sunak before the next election, and this will just add fuel to their fire.
Just finally and briefly, Olivia, the Mark White, our very own Home Affairs editor, he's actually said that more than 900 Channel migrants crossed illegally to the UK in less than a week. Another 359 arrived yesterday. Now, of course, as you well know, Rishi Sunak's narrative has been, look at Ireland. Right, Rwanda is working. That deterrent effect is working. Even the Irish government says so. Well, hang on a minute. 900 in less than a week. It can't be working very well.
Well, exactly. I mean, that is the last thing that Rishi Sunak wants to hear now. He will try and argue, along with his government, that the Rwanda plan won't actually come into effect for another 2-3 months. And we were only expecting there to be that sort of deterrent effect for migrants coming over here once people saw that actually people were taking off and leaving for Rwanda. So perhaps this policy will sort of come to fruition in a few months' time. Rishi Sunak has got to really, really hope that that is the case. He has decided to put all his eggs in one basket with this Rwanda policy. He said that he was going to stop the boats, and actually, arguably, he's done quite well on some aspects of that promise. In the last year, there were fewer migrants, almost a third fewer migrants than there were the year before. The number of Albanian migrants, for example, example, has gone down by 70%. But he has chosen to talk a lot about this Rwanda policy and basically hinged his own success on whether or not it works. So he will be really, really crossing his fingers that those numbers that Mark White was talking about earlier start to go down over the next months.
All right, Olivia Utley, thank you very much for that analysis as ever. Now, I'm joined by Aaron Bastani, who's the co-founder of Novara Media, and the political commentator Emma Wolfe, who joined me in the studio. I'll start with you, Aaron, because I started with Emma last time. Hearing what Olivia had to say there on the problems presented to the Conservative Party at the moment, do you see any way out for Rishi Sunak? Do you see the polls narrowing at any point over the next few months? In any way, shape or form?
I think even in pillow talk with his wife, his other half doesn't say that. I think it's almost implausible, frankly. I do wonder, in the case of Dr Poulter, how long Labour's had this in their pocket. I mean, this may be months in the making. There's a great phrase, amateurs do strategy, professionals do logistics. And I feel like Labour are now operating at just a whole other level when it comes to stuff like this, scuppering what was momentum for Sunak over the last week with this announcement. Are there other announcements that they have going forward? I don't know. So I feel very, I'm not so sorry for him, but I feel it seems quite obvious, frankly, that they could be looking at their biggest defeat possibly ever in the modern period, which is on Sunak's head, but it's been long in the making, I think.
Yeah. Emma, on that point, though, of Rishi Sunak standing up and saying, oh, aren't I good, aren't I clever, look what I've done, Rwanda's working. And as Olivia just explained there, 900 in a week. That's 900 people.
But does anybody think that even if a single flight manages to take off, because it was going to be March, and then it was going to be by Easter, and then it was going to be, now it's going to be July, even if a single flight takes off, or a couple of flights, with a couple of hundred migrants, and they get deported to Rwanda, at what cost? Is anyone pretending that £500 million, north of that figure, actually, when you pile it all in together, north of £500 million is an acceptable amount of taxpayers' money to be ploughed into this policy? I mean, is it a deterrent? No. Is it going to be a deterrent? Unless you are removing people from small boats and putting them on a flight to Rwanda, and you make it that direct, that link, that you will come to this country, you will land on our shores and you will be deported to Rwanda, I don't think any of the people traffickers, and certainly not the migrants, are worried about this.
All right. I mean, another story that caught my eye was Angela Rayner, right? And, of course, there's been the current controversy that's going on there. But Labour have come out and Labour have said Angela Rayner is an enormous asset to Labour and will have a big role to play in the general election campaign. Do you view Angela Rayner as an enormous asset for the Labour Party?
I think she gives them a measure of authenticity as a party of the working class. That's certainly missing from their other leading lights. Keir Starmer certainly doesn't transmit that. I mean, the fact he has to repeatedly say, my father was a toolmaker, I mean, is quite instructive in that regard. She's an asset, but what I find key, and I'll be brief on this, is that when Starmer has spoken about this case, he's always said, my team is aware of the details. He never says that he is, which I find concerning.
Arm's length, he wants an arm's
He's a lawyer.
Yes.
He's a lawyer. He doesn't want to commit himself.
Deliberate, Emma?
Is she an asset? No. I think is she an enormous asset? No. She's an enormous potty mouth. I think it's patronising to working class people to pretend that just because she's from a council house, she had a very modest, very, very poor beginnings. Good for her. She's pulled herself up. Absolutely. She's deputy leader of the Labour Party. All credit to her. But I think she calling people scum, calling them pint-sized losers, all of that stuff. I think it reduces. I think it lowers the tone of Parliament. I don't think we need politicians like that.
Do you know what I also found? What I found patronising was the way in which some sections of the press said, oh, she's only being scrutinised because she's working class. And I turned around and said, well, hang on a minute, you know, people that bought their houses under right to buy and she wants to take away right to buy, that's rich grounds for criticism, right? You're not bashing the working class by pointing out an element of hypocrisy there.
I think that's fair. I mean, just to clarify, I don't mean to say she represents the working class because of her accent. She's had a real job. She was a care worker. We need more people like that in politics. And I think when you've got most of your MPs coming from policy, career politics, consultancy, fake jobs on LinkedIn, you do need a smattering of those people, and they don't have many of them. So I think she does. I think she does help in that regard.
OK. I mean, do you accept that?
Yeah, it's true. When you have most of your front bench who are basically millionaires, it's not a good look. And they are, you know, I hate criticising people on the basis of their individual wealth and things like that, but they are out of touch. Just by necessity, they were out of touch with the concerns of people in this country. But I just find it a bit patronising, as though she has to be, because she's a bit of a firebrand and she blasphemes and calls people with uses bad language in the chamber, that she has to be totemic for the working class. Because we don't say all badly behaving middle class people, oh, well, they're, you know, great role models for the middle class. You know, let's just judge Angela Rayner on her own merits. And I just find the way that she operates, you know, hitting out at people, pursuing people, and then objecting when she's pursued, when her affairs are pursued. I think it's patronising to working class people to suggest that they need to admire her.
How do we get more people like that in politics? Because the parties right now seem to me to want basically robots, right?
Yeah.
They want PPE, automated AI, goodness only knows what. And that, to me, fills me with real dread and depression, actually.
Yeah.
And I agree with you completely that we need more people from all walks of life in politics. But how do you actually do that?
I think, and it's not a panacea, I think proportional representation really helps. It wouldn't change everything. You know, you'd probably get 20, 30% more people coming from these kinds of backgrounds, trades. I mean, how many people go from trades? Trades earn good money, so maybe why bother? But how many people go from trades, contractors, building stuff, making stuff, maintaining stuff, keeping this country ticking over? How many people go from that into politics? Very few. And we should all be asking why. That's not a left-right thing.
No, I completely agree. I mean, the fundamental point there would be that actually in encouraging people to get into politics, you have to actually have the parties do it. And so maybe Aaron has a point that unless we get electoral reform, you can't actually do that because there is a two-party system right now.
Sort of stranglehold. Absolutely. And then people feel kind of disaffected because they think, well, is there any point in voting for third, fourth or fifth parties when I know that it's going to be one of the big two? No, I completely agree about proportional representation. And also just about maybe making the route into politics simpler. I mean, I was recently in discussions about standing as a candidate for a third party, and the whole thing, the idea of kind of going out campaigning, all of that, I think a lot of it, and I'm lazy, I'm being lazy, I'm like, I can't do that every
You're not lazy.
Rainy...
You cycle into the studio, you're not lazy.
Rainy November nights, but I think a lot of people feel that kind of resistance. They would like to make things happen and work for people and work for their constituency, work for their local areas, but do they really want to go through that whole local council route? So, yeah, maybe there's a simplification.
Are you not
there.
worried about a few Reform MPs getting through if you have proportional representation?
That's what,
Would
if
that
that's
not
what
fill
people
you with
want.
dread?
You know what? I think one of the worst moments of recent British politics was in 2015 when UKIP got 3.8 million votes and they got 0 MPs.
Exactly.
I think that's outrageous. And I say this to somebody on the left. I honestly think British politics would benefit if you had 30 people in politics, like in Parliament, rather, like Nigel Farage, and 30 people, you know, the opposite on the left. I genuinely think that would make the quality of debate and policy in this country better. There might be some ugly moments, but I think it would be for the public interest.
Well, speaking of ugly moments, though, Emma, would we not end up in a situation like Scotland is going through right now, where Humza Yousaf is having to go with his begging bowl and try and get a party which has one elected official in the Scottish Parliament to back them? Do you end up in a scenario where actually you get weak and unstable government?
Yeah, look, coalitions are difficult, aren't they? Difficult to hold together, difficult to get policy through, all of that. But I just wonder what happened to sitting there. I mean, look at the death of Frank Field this week, and everybody came out and said, what a wonderful man, what a kind, wonderful human being, but also a man who was able to be quite left-wing on some issues and quite right-wing on other issues and quite centrist on other issues. And I just think that's refreshing. People who have principles and conviction. For most of us nowadays, that's more important than whether people identify as blue or red.
Yeah, and the Labour Party and the Conservatives would be certain to split under that scenario as well, wouldn't they?
Will be good news.
Oh, well.
I mean, have the Conservative Party already haven't they? Yeah. How many families have they got now?
Well, that's true.
5,
Very
6,
true.
7, 8,
Very
10.
True.
Well, it's like this Dr. Poulter chap, you know, he sounds like a Liberal Democrat. You know, he should be in the same party as Peter Mandelson. I think that reconfiguration is long overdue.
Yes, it is, and it has been happening for quite a while now. You know, Brexit, I think, just expedited it and highlighted it in a very real way. But Aaron Bastani and Emma, well, thank you very much. We'll come back to you for more analysis shortly. But for all the best analysis and opinion on these stories and more, you can go to our website, folks. It's gbnews.com. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Loads more coming up. We'll cross live to Scotland, where Humza Yousaf is First Minister. But how long for, folks? We'll find out. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
So J. Cole, who is a rapper, says that he felt terrible after releasing a song aimed at fellow rapper Kendrick Lamar and vowed to pull the track off streaming services. He said, "I ain't gonna lie to y'all. The past 2 days felt terrible," he told an audience at the Dreamville Festival in North Carolina. "I damn near had a relapse," he said.
There's a lot of young people, especially, you know, that would look at that and they will take it not just as entertainment.
It doesn't happen in any other form of art that I can think of. This is not happening in country music, is it?
Well, it's the same. It's the same problem in both cases, isn't it? Who's doing the regulating? And surely it's each case on its merits, isn't it? You don't just ban a genre.
Why is there such a lot of hatred for a man who usually would have trash talked back to stand up and say, you know, this doesn't sit well with me and I love this guy? If we look at, I think his name was Cody Fisher, the semi-professional footballer who died in a club because someone stabbed him. Now, he was stabbed because he stepped on someone's trainers. This is the level of ego we're seeing from a lot of young men who don't have any output of being able to channel that energy, and a lot of it is stemming from cultures like football, hip-hop, these sorts of things. So I'm just saying it's refreshing to see a man who could have easily wiped the floor with his lyrics say, I don't have to, you know?
That is interesting, isn't it? Because I took this interview in the wrong direction. It's not about pointing out the areas of concern. Actually, this story is saying, look, music and art can be giving you an example of how to live a slightly better life.
That's free speech. Saying, sorry. I'm sorry, I choose not to fight back because I love you. It may look like a wimpy thing to do, but it's still free speech.
You know what? I love you, Paul. Sorry about earlier.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
...2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, loads of you have been sending in your thoughts. Well, Graham has very stern words for me today. He says, oh my goodness, Darren, we don't need more people like Angela Rayner in British politics. And he says, I think the fact that you want to be a politician should actually ban and preclude you from ever being one. Well, that's an interesting proposition. And, well, I'm afraid there are a few disagreements with the panel about Angela Rayner and getting more people like her in politics. Irene says, I'm working class, but I absolutely cringe when I hear the way she speaks. Working class doesn't mean rude, which is a fair point. And Brendan is delighted to see the end of Humza Yousaf. And, well, it's not over yet, Brendan. right? The fat lady hasn't sung yet. Right, we're going to get more of your thoughts in the show, so do message along. gbnews.com/your say is the link that you need. Join that conversation or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. Now, Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross has said Humza Yousaf is finished. He agrees with our viewers, even if he survives an upcoming vote of no confidence with the support of Alex Salmond's Alba party. On Thursday, Mr Ross said he would be lodging a motion of no confidence in the First Minister, with other opposition parties at Holyrood, including the Greens, saying they would support it. Let's cross to Edinburgh and speak to the freelance columnist Alistair Stewart. Alistair, thank you very much for your time. What is it, could you just remind the viewers what it is that actually has led to the breakdown of the Greens supporting the SNP in government?
It's a remarkable series of events. So on Thursday, the First Minister, now First Minister Humza Yousaf, announced that the Butte House Agreement, that is the arrangement with the Green Party, has been finished. And that led to 2 ministers leaving government. Now, the tipping point for this was very much the Scottish Government failing to meet its own anticipated climate targets. This was a big thing for the Green Party for obvious reasons. There was a feeling that they were pushed, they were about to be pushed, therefore they were considering jumping an emergency General Assembly later on. Mr Yousaf tried to make a unilateral decision with this, got rid of them from government, and it led to a domino effect that has seen most of the Scottish Parliament now announce that they've lost confidence in him, that's to say the political parties, and there's now going to be a formal vote of confidence on him. Now, that will be subsequently followed by a vote of confidence in his government. Now, the vote of confidence in Mr Yousaf is not binding, but the vote of confidence in his government is. I think there's an irony at play here with this was meant to be a pro-independence majority that was at Holyrood with the Scottish Greens. There is a great deal of irony that they've focused on policy to such an extent that they've emphasised all the things that they disagree with, but not advanced independence in any way, shape or form. So Thursday's announcement was very much a tipping point rather than a big surprise to anyone except, it seems, Humza Yousaf.
Alistair, I can well imagine, I've met him before, I can well imagine that a figure like Alex Salmond will be absolutely delighted that he's now in a kingmaker position.
Well, this is the irony of it, and I don't mean to keep saying that word, but there's a great deal of it. Mr Yousaf has said the following in quite quick succession, that one, Alex Salmond is a person he's derided repeatedly. The Scottish Tories, he said, he wants to make Scotland Tory-free, and Ash Regan, who was a former member of the SNP government, is now an independent member of the Alba party at Holyrood. These are all people he's desperately going to need support from if he hopes to survive. He's bigged himself up in a way which his predecessors, that's to say Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, could. They had the support, they had the election wins behind them. He himself has struggled as First Minister over the last year. And as you say, yes, all of these people find themselves in the remarkable position of being kingmaker. But in Scottish politics and politics overall, once there's blood in the water, it's enormously hard to get it out. If he was to hypothetically survive these 2 votes which are coming up, that is nothing to guarantee that he will be able to remain in post. There's a real appetite now to see him leave.
Yes, I mean, I don't think it's unfair to suggest that actually Humza Yousaf has spent more time of late speaking about Gaza than he has Glasgow, which is quite an extraordinary position. But Alistair, I want to ask as well, the self-ID question. So, of course, there was the massive controversy over Adam Graham, who was a double rapist who went by the name of Isla Bryson, and Ash Regan, as I understand it, as someone who opposed the self-identification, the trans bill that the SNP put forward, she would actually extract that as a price of any support, would she not?
Certainly there's a rumour mill abounding that that's exactly what she's going to do. Certainly Ash Regan and her party, Alpa, and Alex Salmond, by extension, are in a position where they can extend and write quite a large shopping list and present it to Mr Yousaf. Now, there's an irony with this again. If she does present a shopping list, it will look like Mr. Yusuf is making concession after concession after concession, and is therefore in no position to try and govern from a position of authority as First Minister. But equally, if he does concede, he'll be managed to scrape on for just a little longer. But a little longer is the emphasis here. He's not going to be able to survive without a wholesale reform of his government and his style. And it's a question of whether or not he himself, as a career politician, is going to be able to do that. Ash Reagan is part of the dominoes, but there's a serious issue overall for Mr. Yusuf. And I think Ash Reagan is in a very enviable position, but Mr. Yusuf might be able to rely on our support. He might not be able to, but that is not the only thing that's going to guarantee whether or not he can retain his position as First Minister.
All right, okie doke. Well, we shall watch with eager anticipation here at GB News. That was the freelance columnist Alistair Stewart there. Thank him very much for his view. And we're going to get our panel's response after this. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Loads more coming up on today's show. First of all, though, we're going to get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Darren, thank you. The top stories this hour. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting says Dr Dan Poulter has not been offered a peerage to defect from the Tory party to Labour. Mr Streeting defended Dr Poulter's decision, adding it shows only Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer can be trusted with the NHS. Dr Poulter's reason for defecting. Policing Minister Chris Philp told GB News this morning record spending by the Conservatives into the NHS shows it's improving under Tory leadership. Conservative MP Dr Poulter said he'd sit on the Labour benches until the general election and then stand down. The decision comes just days before local elections across England and Wales on the 2nd of May. Former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has called for a cap on net migration, claiming a far more restrictive system is needed. Jenrick has called for a cap of less than 100,000 a year. He says that's the only way to restore trust with voters. Writing in today's The Telegraph, he says the government's recently passed Rwanda bill will soon join the graveyard of policies that failed to tackle illegal migration, but called legal migration a bigger scandal. According to Mr Jenrick, net migration needs to be scaled back to the tens of thousands. Meanwhile, more than 900 Channel migrants have crossed illegally into the UK in less than a week, according to the latest Home Office figures. Official figures show 359 migrants crossed in 8 small boats yesterday. GB News captured this exclusive footage yesterday. 51 migrants had to be rescued after their small boat ran aground on a sandbank off the Kent coast. And hundreds of Border Force officers at Heathrow Airport will launch a 4-day strike from tomorrow in a dispute over working conditions. The Public and Commercial Services Union says more than 300 of its members will walk out from 5 o'clock tomorrow morning until 7 o'clock on Friday morning. The union says the workers are taking action in protest of plans to introduce new rosters that they say would see around 250 of their staff forced out of their jobs at passport control. A Home Office spokesperson says they remain open to discussing a resolution with the PCS. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Darren.
Thanks very much, Tatiana. There's plenty more coming up on today's show, folks. Nana Akua is on at 3 o'clock and she joins us now. Nana, as you know, I'm a man that loves his Nana. What have you got coming up at 3?
Well, listen, we've got a jam-packed show. We have our usual mystery guest at 5 o'clock. Plus, we'll be discussing whether you can actually trust Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, he says that he wants to keep the triple lock, and he's going to keep the triple lock. But does anybody remember his promise about £28 billion and green energy? So we're going to ask whether you can actually trust his promises. A lot of people may potentially vote Labour. We're also looking at the universities and what on earth is happening to them. If you saw all the stuff that's going on with the pro-Palestine protests and lots of universities protesting in America and across the world, and also what happened to Jacob Rees-Mogg, we're asking what on earth is going on with our young people. Loads of stuff on the show today, plus all the big news topics.
Yeah, shocking scenes with Jacob Rees-Mogg, wasn't it, Nana? Well, I look forward to it, Nana. We'll see you at 3 o'clock. Cheers very much. Now, remember, folks, to let me see your thoughts and, well, to let out your frustration on all of the stories we've been discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Join that conversation, get involved, or message us on our socials. We're at GB News. Now, in a few minutes, we'll discuss whether the Royal Mail should be given millions of pounds of taxpayers' cash to actually help it deliver letters. What do you make of that? All of that and more to come, though. I'm Darren Grimes, and you're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see an east-west split weather-wise across the UK today. Generally, the best of any brightness the further west you head. Low pressure is generally dominating, and it's this weather front, this occlusion here out towards the east and northeast that will bring some more persistent rain to some areas through the day today. Notice fairly tightly packed isobars too, indicating quite a blustery breeze, and it's certainly a wet and fairly blustery picture across those eastern and northeastern areas as we head through the afternoon. Some of those outbreaks of rain could locally be on the heavy side, brighter out towards the west and eventually across some southern spots. But notice a good scattering of showers here, 1 or 2 of those on the heavy side. And quite a chilly day still for the time of year, highs of 12 towards the north, up to 13 or 14 degrees at best towards the south and southeast. As we head through the evening and during the overnight period, the most persistent rain will start to pull away towards the northeast, lingering across the northern hours into the early hours of Monday. Elsewhere, clearer for a time, but notice a good rush of showers pushing back in from the west, so turning pretty wet out across some western spots into the early hours of Monday. Under the clearest skies, we could see a local frost, temperatures down close to freezing, but mostly frost-free. And as we head through Monday, once again, an east-west split in our weather, but it's the east this time seeing the best of the conditions, the brightest skies out towards the east and across the southeast of England. And elsewhere, plenty of showers out towards the west and eventually across many northern spots too. And again, some of those showers turning quite heavy, merging to give some longer spells of rain at times too. And temperatures a bit higher than today though, up to 16 or 17 towards the southeast, near 12 to 14 across the north of the UK.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Camilla Tominey. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. We're on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, here's a question for you at home. Should the Royal Mail be given millions of pounds of taxpayer cash, your cash, to help it deliver letters? Reportedly, it wants the government to help it cover the cost of delivering post across the United Kingdom. And let's see what the panel make of this? Aaron, this has got me, I'm going to have to go out and buy a copy of Luxury Automated Communism.
Yeah.
That's what it was called, wasn't it?
That's it, fully automated luxury
fully
communism.
Automated, sorry, I got that wrong. Because actually, is this a sign of, you've got the water companies, you've got the Royal Mail now, it's a sign of actually it's not working, is it?
Privatisation for many things has been a complete disaster. Water, I think, is inarguable. Rail, I think, is pretty strong, but I know there's mixed feelings about that. My view on rail is the same. But Royal Mail is the one that really takes the biscuit along with water. There was a gentleman who became the chief executive of Royal Mail in 2018. His name was Rico Back. He was given a pay deal of £6 million a year. This is before COVID. Do you know where he worked from? Switzerland.
Wow.
He was doing work from home while earning all that money. What we've seen with Royal Mail over the last decade is the customer pays more and more for less and less. The services go later, they don't want to do as many days, their workers get less money, right? They've not seen their wages keep up with inflation, Royal Mail workers. So the taxpayer lost out because we sold it on the cheap, the workers lose out, the consumer loses out because it's getting more expensive every year. Who's winning?
Yeah.
It's not everyday Brits, and that's why I think we need to bring it back into public ownership.
Well, do you not think, though, is there a case for the government just saying, well, fine, we'll just we'll make a sort of a universal service and we'll look for other tenders for that agreement? Perhaps, does it have to be Royal Mail?
So the thing with Royal Mail is it's technically two companies.
Yeah.
It has two CEOs. One of the companies is hugely valuable. It's basically a global logistics company. The people that run Royal Mail right now want to basically privatise that and make a ton of money again, and they want to lumber the taxpayer with the business that we all think about when we think of Royal Mail. So this has really been a historic robbery, a heist, and it's ongoing. And I don't think people are as aware of the facts as they should be. This is a classic example of privatisation benefiting a very small slither of society, everybody else losing out.
I mean, Emma, do you share those remarks? Are you now a red in tooth and claw communist at this point?
I'm really angry about this. Yet another privatised company expecting government bailouts. No way, no more millions being poured into it. As Aaron says, we are paying more and more, ridiculously expensive first and second class stamps for a totally substandard service, barely 6 days a week, often parcels dumped, letters not delivered, letters not prioritised.
I have to say, you know what, like most people, I like my postie. I really like my personal postie.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not... It's like liking your... Yeah, liking your specific NHS receptionist and still criticising it. What I'm talking about is this is absolutely unacceptable. Massive financial mismanagement, massive payouts to the big bosses, to the guys in Switzerland, and yet they're coming with a begging bowl to the government now. I mean, we know there's been much less reliance on post nowadays, now that everything is by email, but when you do have really important hospital letters for elderly people who maybe aren't on email, when you have bills, when you have very important documents, they can go missing. No way. You post a first-class stamp. I recently posted a first-class letter which didn't arrive for a couple of weeks. There's no kind of, there's no compensation for that. There's no one you can go to about that. It just kind of gets lost in the system.
I want to ask you about this report in The Telegraph today, where it says 1 in 3 participants in the BBC journalism scheme, the trainees in that, are white Britons. So that's 1 in 3 of them are white Britons. The figure shows that more than 7 in 10 of the places have been given to female applicants. Now, Sir John Hayes, who's the Conservative MP for South Holland and the Deepings, he says that he would be personally referring the findings to the Equalities Commission, Emma, and he says these findings show the BBC is potentially in breach of the Equality Act. He goes on to say, I will personally be referring them to the Equalities Commission and I hope they act accordingly. White working class men are being discriminated against by national institutions in pursuit of their progressive agenda. Are you concerned about that? These diversity, equity and inclusion policies, should the public broadcaster actually be following all of that?
I would hope that as our public broadcaster, as our national broadcaster, look, I mean, I have many criticisms of the BBC, not least keeping on highly paid newsreaders at eye-watering salaries, that kind of thing, and the amount they're paying some of their presenters. I would hope that they are able to interview people and to admit applicants and to admit them onto schemes just on the basis of merit and potential and all of that. I'm just sick of this obsession with diversity, equality and inclusion. I think 35% were majority right, 41% were British, Asian, minority and ethnic groups, and then 23% were other white, including sort of gypsies and Romas, Irish white and travellers. 7 out of 10 are women. Can we just get beyond this? Can we have a group of interesting, talented journalists at the BBC and stop the obsession with DIE?
Aaron, is it white working class men that are going to lose out the most?
Well, I'm half Iranian, and I wish I'd been positively discriminated against when entering the media industry, because I certainly wasn't. The gender split, I think, is the more interesting one here, because it's 70% women, whereas actually, like you say, if you break down the ethnic backgrounds here, 59% are white, and that white other can be white Irish. You might have a Polish parent. You might be British Jewish. You're white. You're visibly white, but you might not identify as white British. So it's not reflective of the country more broadly, but it's not as outlandish as it might initially seem, because I think the headline would make you think, OK, 1/3 are white British, 2/3 are BAME, and that's not true. I agree about the whole meritocracy argument. I think DEI is a very fraught area. I think the left makes a mistake if it just defends it unthinkingly. You have to get the best of the best. You have to reward merit. The counter-argument is, of course, well, we haven't rewarded very talented people from marginalised communities over the years. I think there probably comes a point where you have to have a conversation about the limits of DEI and actually going beyond it.
Well, I'd be totally open and frank. I think it's a racist policy, this diversity, equity and inclusion. I think actually in championing anti-racism, it actually champions racism by default. But, folks, we're going to come back to that brilliant panel. That's Aaron Bastani and Emma Wolfe. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. In a few minutes, we'll be rounding up all the royal news, including an update on King Charles. He's going to be out and about. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The perception of a crime being committed is not based on whether that person intended to commit a crime or not, but whether the victim, in inverted commas, or anybody else for that matter who happened to hear whatever was said, determines that it was motivated by malice or ill will. Most of these things come out in heated exchanges or in, very casual exchanges. And then somebody says, oh, I'm offended or I'm hurt or I'm whatever because this was clearly malicious and it's against me as a black person or a transgender or sexuality, whatever it might be. And somebody says, I perceive this to be motivated by hate. Now, at that point, what is the reasonable test that anybody could apply as to what was in somebody's mind at the time? You don't know what I'm thinking now. I don't know what you're thinking now. Why is it that a crime can be committed on the basis of what somebody is alleged to be thinking?
Well, that's also how discrimination often works, because people have worked out these days that saying something or sending an email like one I received some years ago that said, let's go round her place with pickaxe handles and balaclavas and see what we can do. Now, that's an email that was sent about me. People have worked out that you don't do that. But from the circumstance of what happens, if racial taunts were being shouted, if taunts about someone's protected characteristic were being shouted in the run-up to what then happened, it would be pretty obvious that that was a hate crime.
But we know, for example, that street preachers have been arrested merely for quoting the Bible and without actually intending, anything beyond that.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday, the 2nd of May,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections,
we'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday, the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, as King Charles continues to be treated for cancer, it's emerged that he wants to take part in his Trooping the Colour birthday celebrations. Now, doctors are said to be pleased with the King's recovery. That's 11 weeks after he was diagnosed with cancer. Well, joining me now is the former BBC royal correspondent, Michael Cole. Michael, thank you very much for your company as ever. Do you think, Michael, there's been a lot of pressure, and perhaps that's pressure applied by the King himself, to actually get out and about earlier than perhaps we'd all anticipated?
Good afternoon, Darren. Yes, indeed. I think the King will be delighted to get back to the day job, doing what only he can do. There's only one head of state, and it's King Charles III. And his job is to lead the country and interact with the people. And he's going to start doing that on Tuesday when he and the Queen visit a cancer treatment centre. And as you just mentioned, there is the prospect of the Sovereign's Parade, Trooping the Colour, on the 15th of June. These matters are going to be taken on a day-by-day basis. But I have to tell you, Darren, and I did my first television report on the King 56 years ago, on the day he started at Cambridge University. I've rarely, if ever, seen him look so happy and so fulfilled. Now, that's counterintuitive, really. He's got cancer, but perhaps the prognosis is pretty good. Perhaps he's had good news. So when we saw that photograph of the King and Queen taken on the first day of their 20th year of marriage, I mean, they looked like, didn't they, a couple of newlyweds having a laugh at a joke. So he's very, very happy within himself. I think you saw that on that, and you showed some of the excellent film there, after the Easter Sunday service. I mean, walkabouts weren't always his thing. When he was with Princess Diana, he didn't enjoy them at all. But when you see him there, and your people have brilliantly shown us the photographs, he was really enjoying being back, pressing the flesh, having a chat with people. And I think he appreciated it. I mean, he said he's been very, very moved by the public response. And of course, it's been a very positive response, with people going out and getting themselves checked and contributing to cancer charities. I must say, Darren, that I think rather more to worry about is Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, Kate, because you'll remember that initially when she went into hospital, it was said that she would not be seen in public and interacting with the public until after Easter. Well, we're well after Easter now. So obviously our thoughts go to her, very much so. But it will be good to see the King out and about. Busy summer. I mean, July, there's 3 garden parties, if he can make them. At the end of June, there's Royal Ascot. He ought to go to that because he owns the racecourse. And then there's a week up in Scotland at Holyrood House. And then there's the prospect in October of going to, with the Queen, to the South Pacific, Samoa, to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and then Australia and New Zealand. So there's always plenty of work out there if you want to do it when you're the King.
Yes, I mean, Michael Cole there, thank you very much. We'll end that there and bring in the panel. Thanks as ever. We'll see you shortly. Emma Wolfe is still with me, and so is Aaron Pastani. Do you get the sense that actually, you know, with the Princess of Wales was forced to do this statement, the King is coming back early. Do we put too much pressure on our royals? Do you feel slightly sorry for them?
I don't. Well, yes, I feel very sorry for Catherine at the moment. Like Michael Cole, I really do worry and, you know, wonder what what she's going through at the moment. But I agree about Charles and Camilla. I thought they looked blissfully happy in that sort of honeymoon 19th anniversary photo. I mean, often a serious health crisis kind of, renews your zest for life. And I think maybe Charles has realised you only get one life. He's been seriously ill. He's possibly through the worst of it, and he looks happy.
Aaron, I'm afraid we've run out of time.
That's fine.
Not me cutting you off because you're a Marxist, I promise.
That's fine.
Thank you, as ever, to my brilliant panel, Emma Wolf there and Aaron Bastani. You've been with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Don't go anywhere, though, because there's plenty more coming up on GB News. In just a moment, it's Fiery Debate with Nana Akua, and at 6 p.m, it's Neil Oliver, with Free Speech Nation at 7 and Mark Dolan tonight at 9. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Don't go anywhere, as I say. Nana's up next. Everyone needs their Nana. First of all, though, let's take a look at the weather with Marco Patangda.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Over the next few days, we hold on to rather unsettled weather conditions across the UK, but we will also see a gradual rise in temperature. Low pressure's on the scene at the moment, and it's this weather front towards the northeast of the UK that's bringing some outbreaks of quite persistent rain, coupled with quite tightly packed isobars, so quite a blustery feel to the weather as well. And we do hold on to outbreaks of rain across the far northeast of Scotland, heading into the overnight period. Elsewhere, there'll be some clear spells for a time, but the showers out towards the west and southwest certainly do gather into the early hours of Monday, turning quite heavy and becoming more organised by the morning on Monday itself.